Medieval Greek, also known as Byzantine Greek, is the stage of the Greek language between the end of Classical Antiquity in the 5th–6th centuries and the end of the Middle Ages, conventionally dated to the Ottoman conquest of Constantinople in 1453. From the 7th century onwards, Greek was the only language of administration and government in the Byzantine Empire. This stage of language is thus described as Byzantine Greek. The study of the medieval Greek language and literature is a branch of Byzantine studies, or Byzantinology, the study of the history and culture of the Byzantine Empire. The beginning of medieval Greek is occasionally dated back to as early as the 4th century, either to 330 AD, when the political center of the Roman Empire was moved to Constantinople, or to 395 AD, the division of the empire. However, this approach is rather arbitrary, as it is more an assumption of political as opposed to cultural and linguistic developments. Indeed, by this time the spoken language, particularly pronunciation, had already shifted towards modern forms. The conquest of Alexander, and the ensuing Hellenistic period, had caused Greek to spread to peoples throughout Anatolia and the eastern Mediterranean, altering the spoken language's pronunciation and structure. Medieval Greek is the link between this vernacular, known as Koine Greek, and the modern Greek language. Though Byzantine Greek literature was still strongly influenced by ancient Greek, it was also influenced by vernacular Koine Greek, which is the language of the New Testament and the liturgical language of the Church. History and development. With the transfer of the Roman imperial court to Byzantium between 324 and 330, the political center of the Roman Empire was moved into an area where Greek was the dominant language. At first, Latin remained the language of both the court and the army, and it was used for official documents, but its influence soon waned. From the beginning of the 6th century, amendments to the law were mostly written in Greek. Furthermore, parts of the Roman corpus iuris civilis were gradually translated into Greek, under the rule of Emperor Heraclius, who also assumed the Greek title Basileus in 629. Greek became the official language of the Eastern Roman Empire. This was in spite of the fact that the inhabitants of the empire still considered themselves Romaoi long after the fall of the Western Roman Empire. Despite the absence of reliable demographic figures, it has been estimated that less than one-third of the inhabitants of the Eastern Roman Empire, around 8 million people, were native speakers of Greek. The number of those who were able to communicate in Greek may have been far higher. The native Greek speakers consisted of many of the inhabitants of the southern Balkan Peninsula, south of the Jurachek Line, and all of the inhabitants of Asia Minor, where the native tongues, except Armenian in the east, had become extinct, replaced by Greek, by the 5th century. In any case, all cities of the Eastern Roman Empire were strongly influenced by the Greek language. In the period between 603 and 619, the southern and eastern parts of the empire were occupied by Persian Sassanids, and Alexandria, a center of Greek culture and language, fell to the Arabs in 642. During the 7th and 8th centuries, Greek was replaced by Arabic as an official language in conquered territories such as Egypt. Thus, the use of Greek declined early on in Syria, Egypt, and North Africa. This left Greek-speaking Sicily, Cyprus, Asia Minor, and the southern Balkans. From the late 11th century onwards, the interior of Anatolia was invaded by Seljuk Turks, who advanced westwards. With the Ottoman conquest of Constantinople in 1453, the Peloponnese in 1459–1460, the Empire of Trebizond in 1461, Athens in 1465, and 2 centuries later the Duchy of Candia in 1669. The Greek language lost its status as a national language until the emergence of modern Greece in the year 1821. Language varieties after 1453 are referred to as modern Greek. Diglossia as early as in the Hellenistic period. There was a tendency towards a state of diglossia between the Attic literary language and the constantly developing vernacular Koine. By late antiquity, the gap had become impossible to ignore. In the Byzantine era, written Greek manifested itself in a whole spectrum of divergent registers, all of which were consciously archaic in comparison with the contemporary spoken vernacular, but in different degrees. They ranged from a moderately archaic style employed for most everyday writing and based mostly on the written Koine of the Bible and early Christian literature, to a highly artificial learned style, employed by authors with higher literary ambitions and closely imitating the model of classical Attic, in continuation of the movement of Atticism in late antiquity. At the same time, the spoken vernacular language developed on the basis of earlier spoken Koine, and reached a stage that in many ways resembles present-day modern Greek in terms of grammar and phonology by the turn of the first millennium AD. Written literature reflecting this Demotic Greek begins to appear around 1100. Among the preserved literature in the Attic literary language, various forms of historiography take a prominent place. They comprise chronicles as well as classicist, contemporary works of historiography, theological documents, and saints' lives. Poetry can be found in the form of hymns and ecclesiastical poetry. Many of the Byzantine emperors were active writers themselves and wrote chronicles or works on the running of the Byzantine state and strategic or philological works. Furthermore, letters, legal texts, and numerous registers and lists in medieval Greek exist. Concessions to spoken Greek can be found in literature in the following examples. John Malalas's chronography from the 6th century, the Chronicle of Theophanes the Confessor, and the works of Emperor Constantine VII Porphyrogenitus. These are influenced by the vernacular language of their time in choice of words and idiom, but largely follow the models of written Koine in their morphology and syntax. The spoken form of Greek was called glossademodes, Haplo-Hellenic, Cathomelimene or Romaic. Before the 13th century, examples of texts written in vernacular Greek are very rare. They are restricted to isolated passages of popular acclamations, sayings, and particularly common or untranslatable formulations which occasionally made their way into Greek literature. Since the end of the 11th century, vernacular Greek poems from the literary realm of Constantinople are documented. The Digenes Secretus, a collection of heroic sagas from the 12th century that was later collated in a verse epic, was the first literary work completely written in the vernacular. The Greek vernacular verse epic appeared in the 12th century, around the time of the French Romance novel, almost as a backlash to the Attic Renaissance during the dynasty of the Komnenoi in works like Seleucus' chronography or the Alexiad. The biography of Emperor Alexios I Komnenos, written by his daughter Anna Komnena about a century later. The Chronicle of the Morea, a verse chronicle from the 14th century, is unique. It has also been preserved in French, Italian and Aragonese versions, and covers the history of French feudalism on the Peloponnese. The earliest evidence of prose vernacular Greek exists in some documents from southern Italy written in the 10th century. Later prose literature consists of statute books, chronicles and fragments of religious, historical and medical works. The dualism of literary language and vernacular was to persist until well into the 20th century, when the Greek language question was decided in favor of the vernacular in 1976. Dialects. The persistence until the Middle Ages of a single Greek-speaking state, the Byzantine Empire, meant that, unlike Vulgar Latin, Greek did not split into separate languages. However, with the fracturing of the Byzantine state after the turn of the first millennium, newly isolated dialects such as Pontic Greek, spoken along the Black Sea coast of Asia Minor, and Cappadocian, spoken in Central Asia Minor, began to diverge. In Greco, a language spoken in the southern Italian exclaves, and in Zarconian, which is spoken on the Peloponnese, Dialects of older origin continue to be used today. Cypriot Greek was already in a literary form in the late Middle Ages, being used in the chronicles of Leontios Machaerasian and Voustronaos, phonetics and phonology. It is assumed that most of the developments leading to the phonology of modern Greek had either already taken place in medieval Greek and its Hellenistic period predecessor Koine Greek, or were continuing to develop during this period. Above all, these developments included the establishment of dynamic stress, which had already replaced the tonal system of ancient Greek during the Hellenistic period. In addition, the vowel system was gradually reduced to 5 phonemes without any differentiation in vowel length, a process also well begun during the Hellenistic period. Furthermore, ancient Greek diphthongs became monophthongs. Vowels. The Sutta, an encyclopedia from the late 10th century, gives some indication of the vowel inventory. Following the anti-stoichic system, it lists terms alphabetically but arranges similarly pronounced letters side by side. In this way, alpha iota is grouped together with epsilon, epsilon iota and eta together with iota, or with omega, and omicron iota with upsilon, indicating that these were groups of homophones, until approximately the 10th, 11th century, when they all merged into I, upsilon, omicron iota and upsilon iota were pronounced as y. In the original closing diphthongs alpha upsilon, epsilon upsilon and eta upsilon, the off-guide u had developed into a consonantal v or f early on. Before n, upsilon turned to m or was dropped. Before s, it occasionally turned to p. Words with initial vowels were often affected by apheresis. I am acute ra greater than I am acute ra, erota greater than roto. A regular phenomenon is synesis. In many words with the combinations acute ao, Iowa, and io, the stress shifted to the second vowel, and the first became a glide j. Thus, Romeos greater than Romeos, enn acute a greater than enya, pios which tarpedia greater than tarpedia. In many cases, the vowel o disappeared in the endings ion, iota omicron nu and ios, iota omicron sigma. Consonants. The shift in the consonant system from voice plosives b, d, and aspirated voiceless plosives p, t, k, to corresponding fricatives was already completed during late antiquity, but the original voice plosives remained as such after nasal consonants, with mb, nd, n. This would not actually change into the modern mv, nth, n, until the 19th century. Catharevusa reforms prescribed them as the pronunciation of educated people. The velar sounds k, x, nk, n were realized as palatal allophones before front vowels. The fricative h, which had been present in classical Greek, had been lost early on, although it is still reflected in spelling through the rough breathing, a diacritic mark added to vowels. Changes in the phonological system mainly affect consonant clusters that show Sandhi processes. In clusters of 2 different plosives or 2 different fricatives, there is a tendency for dissimilation such that the first consonant becomes a fricative or the second becomes a plosive, ultimately favoring the fricative plosive cluster. But if the first consonant was a fricative and the second consonant was bisecond, the first consonant instead became a plosive, favoring a plosive bisecond cluster. Medieval Greek also had cluster voicing harmony favoring the voice of the final plosive or fricative, when the resulting clusters became voiceless. The aforementioned Sandhi would further apply. This process of assimilation and Sandhi was highly regular and predictable, forming a rule of medieval Greek phonotactics that would persist into early modern Greek. When dialects started deleting unstressed I and u between 2 consonants, new clusters were formed and similarly assimilated by Sandhi. Thus, for plosives, kp greater than xp, kt greater than xt, pk greater than fk, pt greater than feet, tk greater than theta k, tp greater than theta p. For fricatives where the second was not per second, theta f greater than theta p, theta x greater than theta k per second, theta greater than saint thrash mu upsilon zeta theta rho alpha sigma greater than mastras mu upsilon sigma tau rho alpha sigma, sf greater than sp, sx greater than sk, f theta greater than feet, fx greater than fk, x theta greater than xt, xf greater than xp. For fricatives where the second was per second, theta s greater than ts, fs greater than ps, xs greater than ks. The nasals per meter and n occasionally disappear in front of voiceless fricatives. For example, NYMF5 nu upsilon mu phi eta greater than NYF5 nu upsilon phi eta, anthos nu theta omicron sigma greater than athos theta omicron sigma. Later, Greek developed a new set of voiced plosives b, d, and, through voicing of voiceless plosives after nasals. It is not known when exactly this development took place, but apparently it began during the Byzantine period. The graphemes mu pi, nu tau and gamma kappa for b, d and g can already be found in transcriptions from neighboring languages in Byzantine sources, like in nu tau epsilon rho beta iota sigma eta sigma, from Turkish dervis. The prenasalized voice spirants mu beta, nu delta and gamma gamma were still plosives by this time, causing a merger between mu beta, mu pi, nu delta, nu tau and gamma gamma, gamma kappa, which would remain until the learned pronunciation reforms prescribed during the Catharay-Vusiri era. Grammar. Many decisive changes between ancient and modern Greek were completed by circa 1100 AD. There is a striking reduction of inflectional categories inherited from Indo-European, especially in the verb system, and a complementary tendency of developing new analytical formations and periphrastic constructions. In morphology, the inflectional paradigms of declension, conjugation and comparison were regularized through analogy. Thus, in nouns, the ancient Greek third declension, which showed an unequal number of syllables in the different cases, was adjusted to the regular first and second declension by forming a new nominative form out of the oblique case forms. Ancient Greek ho pate acute are greater than modern Greek ho pateras, in analogy to the accusative form tun patera. Feminine nouns ending in is, as formed the nominative according to the accusative ida, ada, as in elpus greater than elpida and in hellas greater than elada. Only a few nouns remained unaffected by this simplification, such as to phos genitive to photos. The ancient Greek formation of the comparative of adjectives ending in ion and on, which was partly irregular, was gradually substituted by the formation using the suffix ter and regular endings of the adjective meson greater than mesorterus. The enclitic genitive forms of the first and second person personal pronoun, as well as the genitive forms of the third person demonstrative pronoun, developed into unstressed enclitic possessive pronouns that were attached to nouns. Mou, su, tu, tis, mas, shash, tun. Besides the particles na and thena, the negation particle den was derived from the ancient Greek word audein. Irregularities in verb inflection were also reduced through analogy. Thus, the contracted verbs ending in au, eo, etc., which earlier showed a complex set of vowel alternations, adopted the endings of the regular forms. Agapa greater than agapi. The use of the past tense prefix, known as augment, was gradually limited to regular forms in which the augment was required to carry word stress. Reduplication in the verb stem, which was a feature of the old perfect forms, was gradually abandoned and only retained in antiquated forms. The small ancient Greek class of irregular verbs in me disappeared in favor of regular forms ending in o. Choni me greater than chono. The auxiliary I me, originally part of the same class, adopted a new set of endings modeled on the passive of regular verbs. as in the following examples. In most cases, the numerous stem variants that appeared in the ancient Greek system of aspect inflection was reduced to only two basic stem forms, sometimes only one. Thus, in ancient Greek the stem of the verb lambanein appears in the variants lam, lab, leps, leph and lem. In medieval Greek, it is reduced to the forms lamv and lav. One of the numerous forms that disappeared was the dative. It was replaced in the 10th century by the genitive and the prepositional construction of is plus accusative. In addition, the dual, nearly all the participles and the imperative forms of the third person were lost. The optative was replaced by the construction of subordinate clauses with the conjunctions oti and ina. New alpha first became ina and later na. By the end of the Byzantine era, the construction telo na plus subordinate clause developed into thena. Eventually, thena became the modern Greek future particle ta, which replaced the old future forms. Ancient formations like the genitive absolute, the accusative and infinitive and nearly all common participle constructions were gradually substituted by the newly emerged gerund constructions of subordinate clauses. The most noticeable grammatical change in comparison to ancient Greek is the almost complete loss of the infinitive, which has been replaced by subordinate clauses with the particle na. Arabic influences have been assumed as a possible explanation for this phenomenon, as a sentence structure such as I can that I go was common in standard ancient Arabic, possibly transmitted through Greek. This phenomenon can also be found in the adjacent languages and dialects of the Balkans. Bulgarian and Romanian, for example, are in many respects typologically similar to medieval and present-day Greek, although genealogically they are not closely related.